Welcome to Natu Reads, an audio library of revolutionary texts. Scripting the Change. Selected writings of Anuradha Ghandy. Women Bidi Workers in the Co-operative Movement. A study of the struggle in the Bhandara District Bidi Workers Cooperative. This article is a case study of a Bidi Workers cooperative in Bhandara District, Maharashtra, and describes the struggle of the women workers to gain control over it. It has been argued that the state policy of development from above has pitfalls. Cooperativization and development can only go together if the masses are involved at an equal footing with the so-called local elites. The very fact that a National Commission on Self-Employed Women and Women Workers in the Informal Sector was appointed by the central government in 1987 proves that the problem of poor women workers in the unorganized sector has become serious. In spite of a professed policy of poverty eradication, the fact is that poor women have not gained access to developmental resources. Instead, the growth of modern industry has either pushed out women from many jobs in the organized sector or prevented their absorption into that sector. They have been left to fend for themselves in the informal, poorly paid sector. These women are at a disadvantage when confronted with the complex modern laws and administration. This disadvantage is evident even when they are involved in the process of cooperativization, a pronounced state policy to fight capitalist exploitation. Whether, in reality, the process of cooperativization in its existing form can fulfill the same merits investigation. The present article is a case study of a Bidi Workers cooperative in Bhandara District. It is an account of the struggle of the women workers to gain control of this cooperative and the response of the state to their attempts. In this study, we seek to highlight no unique features of the attempt. Instead, we seek to show that it is representative of the nature of the state-sponsored cooperative movement in India and its relation to the strategy of development adopted by the state of India. The first section deals briefly with the background of Bhandara District. The second section covers the condition of Bidi workers in the district. The third section deals with the struggle of Bidi workers in the district. The next section gives details of the district-level cooperative of Bidi workers that was set up. The fifth section is an account of the struggle of the women workers to control the society, and the sixth section analyzes the response of the bureaucracy and the government to the struggle. The conclusion relates this struggle to wider economic processes. Conditions in the Bidi industry. The exploitative conditions of work and the general plight of the Bidi workers have been documented as far back as 1929 by the Royal Commission of Labor. Many recent studies have also highlighted these facts. The salient features are mentioned below. 1. Shift in production process. When the Bidi industry began around 1910, the workers congregated in the sadars, workshops, for production. But sometime in between 1931 and 1951, the mode of production shifted to the contract-based home production. The main reason for this shift was the application of the Factories Act of 1923 to the Bidi establishments with 20 or more workers after 1930. This resultant atomization has led to flagrant violation of labor laws and exploitation of workers. It seems at that stage the workers too did not oppose this shift in the production process as they were unaware of the consequences. They were attracted by the convenience of working from their own houses in their villages. 2. Marginalization of Bidi workers. With the contractor, home-based system of production, the Bidi production reached remote villages of the district. As a result, the number of Bidi workers, particularly women, increased. But the contract system helped to keep the wages low, even depress them further. As a result, beedi making can no longer be a source of livelihood and has been relegated to a secondary position. The practice of parallel or business beedi production by unknown and unregistered establishments has also brought down the wages. A study conducted by the National Labor Institute in 1985 showed that the workers were paid between 3 rupee 50 to 4 rupees for 1,000 beedis, instead of the then prevailing minimum wage rate of 9 rupees. At present, in Bhandara town also, the prevailing rate in business is 6 rupees for 1,000 beedis as against the minimum wage rate of 12 rupees. 3. Increase in the proportion of female workers. Since 1961, there has been an increase in the production of female workers, the main reason for which could be extremely low wages paid, as a result of which many male wage earners are seeking other better paid forms of labor. Also, the general inflation has forced women to supplement the family earnings, and the home-based nature of the beedi production is convenient for women, even if the wage rate is low. 4. Forms of exploitation. The exploitation of beedi workers has been well documented. There are many ways in which the women are exploited by contractors and industrialists. A. They're paid low wages on a piece rate basis. B. They're supplied with less tobacco and leaves than required for making 1,000 beedis. To make up the shortfall, in order to avoid a wage cut, the women have to buy the tobacco or leaves from the contractor at the price set by him. C. The contractor wets the tobacco before distributing it in order to increase its weight, and supplies defective leaves so that the women are forced to buy fresh leaves. D. As high as 20% of the beedis rolled in a day are cast aside as rejected and sold subsequently under another brand name. Lack of proper procedure for rejecting the beedis has led to this form of exploitation. E. Beedi rolling being a seasonal job, the work pattern is very irregular. Due to the informal nature of production and the lack of proper records, most of the workers depend upon the contractor to give them the work and are, therefore, unable to protest against his arbitrary style of functioning. F. None of the labor legislations applicable to the workers, whether it be the provisions of Beedi and Cigar Workers Act, which binds the contractors to maintain proper registers, give the workers an identity card and wages book, nor the Maternity Benefits Act, the Provident Fund Act, and the Bonus Act are implemented for the home-based workers. Constant inhalation of tobacco dust leads to bronchial problems, including TB. The companies take no responsibility to maintain the health of their workers. Many of the older woman workers felt that after years of beedi rolling, their bodies, accustomed to this sort of work, are incapable of any other forms of physical labor. This rampant exploitation has led to the beedi workers getting organized. The setting up of cooperative societies was seen as an answer to their existing problems. The mobilization and organization of the beedi workers in Bhandara. The formation of the district-level cooperative of Bidi Workers in Bhandara in 1981 was preceded by the struggle of the workers over the closures of several centers by big beedi manufacturers and over the issue of raising the minimum wage rate. The beedi workers of Bhandara have had a long history of struggle. This is because of a concentration of beedi workers in the district and the fact that most of them belonged to one caste. Although no documented account of the struggle of the beedi workers in the area is available, the narrations of older workers point out that even in the early 1950s, there had been militant struggles of beedi workers with a high participation of women workers, especially around Gondia. Though a section of them has been organized by a communist group that called itself Bolshevik Party, most of the workers in the area were organized by the followers of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The most dynamic and successful of them was advocate Dadasaheb Kumbhare. The enactment of the special legislation for beedi workers, namely the Beedi and Cigar Workers Act, 1966, and the extension of other protective benefits like maternity benefits, Provident Fund, and bonus for beedi workers, were primarily due to the agitations led by and the efforts of advocate Kumbhare. The agitation of the beedi workers has had a political and social impact in Vidarbha. This has been possible due to the significance of the Bidi industry to the economic life of Bhandara District, coupled with the large proportion of scheduled caste workers in the industry, especially Mahar/Buddhist, and the strong and articulate political organization among them. But each time certain provisions have been made applicable to Bidi workers, the Bidi manufacturers have responded by trying to set the gains to naught. When the Factories Act was made applicable to the dingy, unventilated, overcrowded sheds, they dismantled the Sadar system and introduced the contractor-mediated home-based system of production. The minimum wage rate is rarely applicable due to the prevalence of the dispersed, irregular contractor system. When the Maternity Benefit Act was extended to cover the woman Bidi workers, the Bidi kings struck off the names of the women from the rolls and introduced the names of their male family members. Thus, the woman became the Benami, unnamed, producers for their brothers, husbands, or sons. When the Provident Fund, PF, was made compulsory, they deducted it from the workers' wages, but did not deposit the money with the PF commissioner. Nor did they contribute their own share. Thus, the workers' deducted wages were appropriated as capital for their businesses. Now, only 10 years later, after a Vidarbha-wide agitation, have the workers been gradually getting their PF back. When these maneuvers were not successful enough, the manufacturers shifted to other states where labor was less organized and, therefore, more easily exploited. Each time that many centers of these Bidi manufacturers closed down, rendering thousands unemployed, agitations have been launched. One of the important and spontaneous responses to closures has been to set up workers' cooperatives. Hence, several cooperatives of Bidi workers were started in the late 1950s and again in the early 1970s. But none of these cooperatives have been successful. Most of them boarded up after some years. The only exception in the whole of Vidarbha has been the one started by advocate Kumpare in 1960 in Kamptee, Nagpur district. The Kamptee-based Majdur Bidi Sahakari Sanstha Private Limited, which began without any government financial aid, is still running profitably with 361 woman workers. In 1980, when one more wave of closures of Bidi production centers of big manufacturers, like C.J. Patel & Co. and Mohanlal Halgonbindas, occurred, whereby thousands of workers were thrown out of jobs, the Bhandara Zilla Bidi Kamgar Sahakari Santha was set up. Formation of the society and its collapse. In 1980, manufacturing firms in Bhandara and Nagpur districts closed their centers and fled to other states like Bihar, MP, and AP, where the minimum wage rates were much lower. As a result of this, a total of 11,842 Bidi workers in Bhandara district became unemployed almost overnight. Spontaneously, these workers decided to start local-level cooperative societies to generate employment. At that time, Haribhau Naik, the State Minister for Labor and Chief Minister Antulai's cabinet, an INTUC leader of Vidarbha, intervened to provide government finance. It was decided that instead of several smaller societies, a district-level cooperative would be set up, one in Nagpur and the other in Bhandara. A total of 4,850 unemployed Bidi workers became members of the society by buying shares of 11 rupees each. To the amount of 55,000 rupees, collected as share capital from the workers, the government granted 23.6 lakh rupees as share capital. Some additional funds were granted towards the cost of advertisements and for purchase of vehicles, etc. The society started production in September 1981 with its headquarters in a rented building in Bhandara town. The society started off on an extremely sound financial footing with a capital stock of more than 25 lakh rupees. Thus, the Bhandara Zilla Bidi Kamgar Sahakari Sanstha was born. The bidis rolled by the society were sold under the brand name of Sopti Bidi. 5 centers were started in quick succession, generating employment for 529 workers. Most of the 84 workers in Lakhni were women, and all except 2 belonged to the scheduled caste. This center functioned for 3.5 years. Lakhni being a big village, and with a population of almost 9,000, there were several rice and oil mills and agricultural work in the surrounding area. But the Bidi workers, having ruled Bidis for decades, found it difficult to find alternate employment. The management of the society was entrusted to a managing committee fully nominated by the state government. The committee was to function under the supervision of the district deputy registrar of cooperatives. The assistant commissioner of labor, based in Gondia, was the president of the society, and the assistant registrar, co-op, was the vice president. A grade 1 officer of the cooperative development was on deputation as a managing director of the society. Apart from these high-ranking bureaucrats in the committee, there were 7 representatives of the members of the society who were also nominated. All of them, without exception, were private contractors of Bidi manufacturers. Not one of the ordinary workers and not a single woman was nominated for the managing committee, although a majority of the members were women. The expectation of the state government that the contractors who had so far exploited the workers would suddenly transform and fight the monopoly of the Bidi kings, to whom their interests were tied, was nothing short of utopian. According to the cooperative officials, the reasons for the failure of this cooperative venture were several. According to them, the cooperative was started at too short a notice, because of which no proper groundwork could be done. Also, according to them, the cost of production was too high, because they paid wages according to the Minimum Wages Act, while private manufacturers did not. Also, private firms evaded payment of excise duty, while the society did not. Thus, their cost of production exceeded the prevailing market price. Hence, they concluded that Bidis could not be manufactured on a cooperative basis profitably, while labeling the whole attempt a failure. The failure of the cooperative venture lay not only in the reasons given above, but in the very structure of the cooperative that was set up. The managing committee, consisting of bureaucrats and contractors, could hardly be expected to have any interest or spare the time necessary to make such a venture successful in the face of competition from the Bidi kings. Not merely was there indifference, but also open corruption, allegations regarding which have been made by employees and women workers and which were never denied. The society became a private fief of the officer of the cooperative department in deputation. It is little wonder, then, that the cost of producing 1,000 Bidis was shown to work out to 35 rupees when the market price for selling did not exceed 25 rupees per thousand. No efforts were made to cut down the production cost. That there was no planning before the society was launched, and no proper marketing facilities developed, which led to stockpiling within 2 years of the society's birth, is true. By 1984, there were 1.75 crore of Bidis left unsold in the society's godowns. With special permission from the government, they were finally sold at 1/3 of the cost of the production. Ironically, the managing committee was chosen from the cooperative department, precisely because of their expertise in handling such problems. Their total lack of interest in the success of the society is reflected in the indiscriminate opening of centers. Centers were opened to appease political and other leaders rather than to help the society grow slowly and soundly. Marketing has been the main problem. The employees built up a market for the Zopidi Bidi, but the committee managing the society made no systematic efforts to help the society to become viable. As a result, the financial crises deepened by late 1984. Out of a total of over 25 lakh rupees share capital, with which the society had started, the society was left with hardly 5 lakh rupees. It is significant to note that during this entire period, the ordinary members had no say whatsoever in the running of the society. It was only when the news about the mismanagement and imminent closure of production became known that the employees and the members of the society stirred themselves into action. They knew that the only way the society could survive and be rehabilitated was to get rid of the corrupt bureaucrats in the management and wrest control of the society themselves. Thus, the confrontation between the cooperative department and the bureaucrats on the one hand, and the women workers and the employers on the other began. The women and their struggles. The society belongs to us. The loan was given to us. These women from poor families, with little or no formal education, and whose lives had revolved around their homes, were trying to face up to the might of the bureaucracy. With hardly any experience of struggle, they were at a disadvantage. Barsanbai, an elderly woman from Lakni, widowed soon after her marriage, was one of the few exceptions. She had earlier participated in an unsuccessful attempt to start a cooperative of Bidi workers. With her 30 years of experience in various Bidi workers' agitations, she was undoubtedly the leader of the Lakni workers, whom she mobilized very effectively. Malambe from Bhandara, the widow of about 45 years, was yet another leader who had participated in an earlier struggle. She is well known for the 10-day hunger strike she had sat on, in 1980, when her company had closed down. It was with great pride that she said, quote, "I broke my fast only when the collector himself assured me that he would look into the matter," end quote. Needless to say, she had a hand in the initial stirrings among the women which began in October 1984. As news about the rapid erosion of the capital stock of the society came into the open, the women started getting restless. Already, the women were contributing 50 bidis a day free to help the society tide over its losses. The woman's anger knew no bounds when the misuse of the society's finance became more and more blatant. For the first time, a group of 30 women workers of Bhandara mustered up enough courage to question the managing committee. Chitra, an orthopedically handicapped young woman, the only matriculate among them, was their spokesperson. She drafted a letter demanding an explanation for the alleged losses and the expenditure incurred. The letter also questioned the need to retain certain employees in service. This letter, signed by 30 women and handed over to the managing committee at the annual general body meeting held in October 1984, was the first jolt that the committee received. The vice president, finding himself on a sticky wicket, adjourned their meeting. These women, who, for all those years, had only been workers, and had been kept that way by the managing committee, had now begun to assert themselves as members of the cooperative society. When no information was forthcoming, the employees of the society mooted the idea of forming a union of the Bidi workers and the paid staff of the society. A well-known local labor lawyer, long associated with the struggle of the Bidi workers, was made president. The inherent inequalities of our traditional social structure, which views women as incapable and inefficient of handling any position of power, were reflected in the appointment of the union's office bearers. Not a single woman was made the office bearer of the union. Yet it was these very same women who later participated actively in the demonstrations, marches, geraos, picketing, and hunger strike, and even went to jail for a brief period. Initially, the union submitted a detailed memorandum to senior officials of the cooperative department and the state minister for cooperation. Facts about the callous mismanagement of the society, the nepotism and corruption among the cooperative department officials running the society, were submitted. The union pleaded for an inquiry and intervention to help the society get reorganized. These charges were detailed out for the chief minister as well. The union even submitted various suggestions on how to cut losses and improve sales. In spite of the question being raised in the DPDC meeting, and a special meeting being called by the district collector of the workers' representatives in the managing committee, nothing came of the suggestions and proposals, except that a special audit of the counts was ordered. The women workers of Bhandara and Lakni centers got activated when their centers closed in July 1986. From then onwards, they were in the forefront of the struggle to save the society from closure and to demand control over the society. One of the main demands of the workers was that the existing managing committee should be dissolved, as its term had ended, and elections should be held, so that the worker members of the society could choose their own representatives. The other important demand of the women was for government help to rehabilitate the society. With these two main demands, for 6 months, the woman continuously agitated, sometimes demonstrating outside the office of the Assistant Labor Commissioner and the President of the Society, sometimes shouting slogans in front of the cars of the visiting ministers in order to attract their attention, and even kidnapping the officials of the cooperative department. For all the women, this was a tremendous experience. They completely overcame their fears and hesitations. For instance, mild-mannered Ahilyabe, from a protected lower middle-class background, soon learned to argue vehemently with the management. A morcha to the Vidhasabha, several delegations and meetings with ministers and officials, yielded nothing more than well-sounding but vague assurances. Finally, when all the assurances given by the divisional and district level cooperative department officials and the managing committee were exposed as being totally false and misleading, the woman decided to sit on a relay hunger fast cum dharna sit-in. It was due to the lack of knowledge of the formal rules and the complicated procedures of the cooperative laws that the woman could be fooled for so long, but the bureaucracy ultimately exposed itself. Yet, through this process, the woman learnt about the complex structure of the bureaucracy and its devious ways. They learned to identify the various ministers, such that Anube's high school-going children would gasp with surprise at their mother's newly acquired ability to casually identify the ministers who were touring the town. At the end of January 1987, a relay hunger fast cum dharna was launched in front of the district deputy registrar's co-op's office. The pandal, tent, for the dharna was made colorful with posters exposing the deeds of the corrupt officials. A handbill explaining their deeds was distributed all over the town. Many local people came forward to give support and even funds for the agitation. Every day the woman gathered at the gate and demonstrated, while 4 of them sat on the 24-hour fast. Several times, workers from Paraswada and Lakni too joined the hunger strike. A militant demonstration led to 30 of them being arrested and sent to jail for 2 days. Even the bravest among them were terrified when they heard that they would have to go to jail. Women who had been married for over 20 years dissolved into tears at the thought of what their husbands were likely to do when they were released. Nursing mothers had to get their relatives to bring their infants to the jail to be kept with them. Yet their fear of the life behind the huge stone walls disappeared, and later, they could recount with pride about their incarceration. In fact, when plans for reopening of the society appeared to be finalized, they insisted that those who had been to jail should be the first to be given work. Contrary to the woman's fears, all of them were welcomed back to their homes. This was because, at this time, there was support from the localities in which the women were concentrated, since the struggle was viewed as a just struggle against the usurper bureaucrats. The dharna continued through the arrest and after their release. All this made an impact as the local MLA intervened through the district Palak guardian minister. A high-level meeting with senior state-level officials of the cooperative department in the presence of the minister and MLAs was held in Bombay in the Montalalaya. A concrete-sounding decision about transferring the management of the society to a committee of local MLAs and representatives of the members chosen by the union was agreed upon. A proposal for the rehabilitation of the society was to be submitted to the government on behalf of the worker members by the union. The 25-day-long dharna was finally lifted after these decisions, with the hope that the society would restart production within a couple months. The agitation ended after 6 months of continuous effort, but the reopening of the society was stuck in the tangle of the bureaucratic maze and the whims of the ministers. When several months passed without any sign of the society reopening, the union managed to organize a delegation of 15 MLAs to approach the concerned cooperative minister to approve the proposal. He passed the proposal for rehabilitation, approved the new committee, and agreed that the government would stand guarantee for bank loan. The papers went to the chief minister for signature, and several months later, when a delegation of the union met the CM, it was informed that he disapproved of such a scheme of rehabilitation with such limited funds. He wanted a bigger, more comprehensive scheme, applicable not merely to this society, but to others as well. To peruse this further, a delegation of ministers, MLAs, and a few others went on a trip to Kerala to study the success story of Bidi cooperatives there. Several more proposals were sent to the CM. But then, the chief minister and his entire cabinet had to resign, and a new CM was appointed. With that, any plan for the revival of the society was shelved. Work in the society had been prized among Bidi workers. They worked together in the Sadar and were free from the petty harassment and exploitative tactics of the contractors. They desperately wanted the society to restart. While waiting for the society to reopen, the women were forced to go back to rolling bidis for private companies. They had to bear the brunt of the taunts of the contractors who hesitated to give work to these Zopti Bidi women. Some of the younger ones, like Ambar, took to work on construction sites where the rate is better than for the bidis. Old Deolabe went picking guavas in nearby orchards. Kisnabe and Tulsabe went for work as agricultural laborers in the season. As the months passed, and more of the private companies closed down production, the women became desperate to earn from all sorts of odd sources. While just a few managed to get permanent jobs, in the place of their dead husbands, for most, life has been depressing. Kamalabe got out of the drudgery of bidi rolling. She was married off to an old railway worker who died within 2 months of her marriage. He left her well provided. She lives with his college-going son, off her late husband's pension. All the woman felt that she was lucky. Jenabe, separated from her husband many years ago, had lived with her married sister's family, earning her sustenance through bidi work. With Zopti Bidi closing down, she rolled bidis for private companies. But when even that stopped, and she found it impossible to fend for herself with the rate of 5 to 6 rupees that business bidi rolling fetched her, she was forced to leave Bhandara and go back to her parents in some remote village. Anube's husband, a Class 4 employee in the ZP, died. Now, she and her almost blind mother-in-law sit all day long rolling bidis in a mechanically desperate fashion to supplement the meager pension. Kisnabe's eyesight has deteriorated. She complained that she did not get work on construction sites because they said she was too old. So she now works in fields, where she can get work, and rolls business bidis in the night for a contractor who lives in another village. Chitra, who cannot do any other work but roll bidis, looks bleakly at her future. The house she and her old mother built on encroached land had collapsed in the rains, and they were back to a small rented room looking for contractors who would supply them with enough work to sustain themselves. None of them can use the government dispensary for bidi workers since their cards have been cancelled. These women, dispersed and tied to the exploitative grind of daily work, are no longer in a position to present their case afresh to the new CM and his ministers. The proposal lies on the shelf of the Secretariat, while the hopes of the woman recede with each passing month, nay, year. Conclusions. From the experience of the cooperative Bidi workers in the backward district of Maharashtra, several important conclusions can be drawn. State policy, with regard to the growth of cooperatives among the unorganized, peace-rated Bidi workers, had a dual character. On the one hand, the state encourages the growth of cooperatives and has even given financial aid to such societies. But on the other hand, it leaves the societies exposed to unrestrained market forces, as they are expected to compete with well-organized private enterprises and succeed. More important, the approach of the state has been the formation of cooperatives from above, through state intervention and the regulation of these cooperatives by the administration, instead of emphasizing the need to mobilize from below, of involving the poor in the process of formation and management. The state becomes the main agent, thereby marginalizing the people from the process. This bureaucratic stranglehold also kills the cooperative spirit due to anti-cooperative laws that are a result of this approach. Authority is concentrated with bureaucrats and ministers. This approach is not an isolated phenomenon, but is a part of the overall strategy of development adopted by the state of India. Emphasis has been placed on development through capital-intensive industrialization. But this type of industrialization, which is based on sophisticated technology, has meant heavy capital investments and dependence on import of technology, which only a handful with extensive contacts and access to capital can participate in. The modernization theory, that has found favor, advocates dependence on the more industrialized countries rather than encouragement to and the generation of resources, human, technical, and capital, from within the country itself. It is a development from above, without the mobilization of the people. This strategy of development has meant the growth of islands of concentrated industrialization, the displacement of less skilled labor, of which women are an important part, on a large scale, and an inability of the modern industrial economy to absorb the locs who need work. Thus, these locs remain marginalized from the mainstream of economic development and are left to fend for themselves in an insecure, poorly paid, unorganized sector, or forced to lead a semi proletarian existence as self employed. The development policies of the various 5-year plans have emphasized the need for schemes for the upliftment of women and the scheduled castes and tribes. But, in fact, scant attention has been paid to the problem of how the locs who, in fact, come from these sections and are forced to continue in the informal sector will be assured secure sources of livelihood. Women have been given importance in state policy, primarily in their reproductive role. Therefore, focus has been on family planning and childcare, and marginal attention has been paid to socio-economic programs. While the state has enacted labor laws to guarantee a minimum wage, and other protective measures like maternity benefits, etc., the machine set up to ensure their implementation is toothless and ineffective. Violation of these laws is rampant, not merely in the private sector, but also in the state sector. The largest employers of workers on a contract and piece-rated basis are the government departments and the public sector. Workers in the informal sector, contract and piece rate, are a source of high profits. The system has a vested interest in keeping this mass of women and men working in this condition, while women workers are the most vulnerable section. All organized attempts to get these laws implemented have been dealt with ruthlessly by the very state that has enacted them. Therefore, policies for development of workers in the informal sector notwithstanding, women workers in the unorganized sector are a neglected force, exposed to the bondage and exploitation of contractors, moneylenders, and the market forces. The existing policy, ironically, expects that within the framework of the strategy of development, in the midst of capitalist forces and in spite of the grip of the contractors, cooperatives of unorganized women workers will thrive through bureaucratic initiative and intervention.